"You're too fat to be anyone's wife." The town mocked, but he said, "You're perfect to be mine." "Look at her!" Cordelia Ashworth's voice rang clear over the music and laughter of Cedar Falls Harvest Fair. She stood tall in her crimson gown, pearls gleaming at her throat, eyes glittering with malice as she pointed toward the McKinnon family's pie stall. There, Prudence Prue McKinnon froze, a tray of apple tarts balanced in trembling hands. At 25, the blacksmith's daughter had grown used to sidelong whispers, but never this, never an attack so bold, so cruel. 25 years old and not a single suitor, Cordelia crowed, her words slicing through the crowd. Why? Because she's too fat to be anyone's wife. What man would want a woman who can't even care for herself? Laughter erupted, sharp and merciless. A knot of young men snickered openly, one muttering loud enough for all to hear, "Maybe she ought to marry the hog she feeds." The tray slipped from Prue's hands, pies crashing to the ground. Heat scorched her cheeks as tears stung her eyes. She heard her mother's voice, soft, pleading, from behind the stall, but it was drowned beneath the cruel chorus of amusement. Prue couldn't breathe. She turned and fled, pushing past clusters of townsfolk who smirked as she passed. The fair blurred into a haze of lanterns and jeering voices until she burst free, running toward the quiet of the riverbank. There, beneath the great willow tree, she collapsed, sobs racking her chest. For a moment, she thought she was alone, but from across the water, a shadow stirred. A man stepped from the tree line, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, his presence both fearsome and magnetic. Ezra Thornfield, the reclusive woodworker of Pine Valley, and his eyes, gray as storm clouds, were fixed only on her. The willow's branches swayed gently above her, but Prue felt no comfort in their shelter. Her chest heaved with sobs, each one dragging the memory of Cordelia Ashworth's voice sharper into her mind. The words rang again and again, cruel as hammer blows. "Too fat to be anyone's wife." She pressed her face into her hands, wishing she could vanish into the earth. All her life she had been compared to other girls, slimmer, prettier, more graceful. She had grown skilled with her hands, kneading dough, shaping pies, helping her father at the forge when he needed an extra pair of strong arms. But no skill, no kindness, no act of generosity had ever seemed enough to blot out the simple truth people saw when they looked at her body. Now, with the whole town laughing, it felt final. She was not just unwanted, she was a spectacle, a joke. A rustle of movement snapped her from her despair. She looked up, startled. Across the river stood a figure, tall and broad-shouldered, half-shrouded in the deepening dusk. Her heart jolted. It was him, the man people whispered about in the market, the one who came down from Pine Valley with carts of carved chairs and tables, only to vanish again into the forest. Ezra Thornfield. The townsfolk called him strange, even dangerous. Some said he had blood on his hands, others that he was touched in the head after losing his family. Whatever the rumors, Prue had never dared to look at him for long when he appeared. He was too imposing, too otherworldly, like something carved out of the mountain itself. Now he was crossing the river toward her. She scrambled to her feet, shame flooding back as she realized what he must have seen. Her tear-stained face, her plump figure hunched in misery, her weakness laid bare. She turned to flee, but his voice stopped her in her tracks. "Don't run." It was low, steady, carrying across the water like a vow. She froze, trembling. "Please, leave me alone," she stammered. I don't want to be a burden. I've been told enough times I'm not worth anyone's trouble. Ezra's boots crunched on the stones as he stepped onto her side of the bank. His eyes, gray and piercing, softened as they met hers. Is that what you believe? She swallowed hard, unable to hold his gaze. It's the truth. You heard them. I'm too big, too plain. No man would ever— Her voice broke. Ever want me? For a long moment there was only the sound of the river between them. Then Ezra shook his head, slow and deliberate. They don't see you. I do. Her breath caught. He took one more step, close enough that she could see the rough calluses on his hands, the flecks of silver in his beard. You think you're unworthy because small mind said so. But I've watched you, Prudence McKinnon, the way you tend to those who have less, the way you smile even when the world sneers. You're not invisible, not to me. Her lips parted, but no words came. Ezra extended a hand, large and steady. Come with me. Leave their cruelty behind. I can't promise an easy life, but I can promise you'll never be mocked under my roof. Prue stared at his hand, torn between disbelief and the aching hunger to be wanted, truly wanted. The echo of Cordelia's laughter still rang in her ears, yet for the first time another voice was louder. Ezra's, and he was calling her perfect. For a long heartbeat, Prue hesitated. The river whispered at their feet, and behind her the lights of Cedar Falls still flickered in the distance, carrying laughter and cruelty on the wind. One step back would take her to everything she had always known: mockery, whispers, loneliness. One step forward meant plunging into the unknown with a man the town called a recluse, perhaps even dangerous. Her hand trembled, but at last she placed it in his. Ezra's palm was warm and solid, closing gently around hers. Good, he said simply, his voice like the earth itself. Let's go. They walked as night deepened, the path lit only by the silver light of the moon. Pines rose tall around them, their boughs heavy with needles that whispered in the wind. The air smelled of resin and damp moss, wild and clean in a way the town never was. At first, Prue's steps faltered. She clutched her skirts, tripped on roots, flushed with embarrassment every time she stumbled. I'm sorry, she murmured again and again. Each time, Ezra slowed without complaint. You're keeping pace, he would say, his tone even. Don't apologize for what you can do. The words, so simple, felt like balm. They paused at a clearing where Ezra had tethered a horse, a massive bay gelding with a sleek coat. Ezra lifted Prue easily into the saddle, his hands firm but careful at her waist. She blushed at the touch, at how effortless he made it seem to lift her, as if her weight were no burden at all. Hold on, he said, mounting behind her. His chest was a wall of strength at her back, his arms steady around her as the horse started forward. The rhythm of hoofbeats and the sway of the saddle soon lulled her fear. For the first time since leaving the fair, she let herself breathe. The town's jeers seemed far away now, lost in the hush of the forest. After some miles, Ezra spoke again, his voice rumbling low near her ear. You think their words make you less. They don't. I left the city because I learned how empty people's judgments can be. They praised me when I built fine houses, cursed me when tragedy struck. None of it mattered, only what was true. Prue tilted her head slightly, her voice small. And what is true? That you are not what they say. Silence settled between them after that, but it was a gentle silence, heavy with meaning. By the time the first stars scattered across the sky, They reached a small glade. Nestled within it stood Ezra's cabin, its windows glowing with firelight. The structure looked almost like it had grown from the forest itself. Solid logs, a porch lined with carved railings, and smoke curling from the chimney. Ezra dismounted first, then helped Prue down, his hand steadying her as her boots touched the ground. She stared, wide-eyed. "This is your home?" she whispered. "Our home, if you want it," he replied quietly. Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting. Shelves lined with hand-carved figures and bowls, rugs woven with patterns of pine and deer, a long table scarred by years of use. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, its glow chasing away every chill that clung to her bones. Ezra gestured toward a chair by the fire. "Sit. You've had enough hardship for one day." She obeyed, sinking into the sturdy seat. The warmth seeped into her skin, loosening the tight knot in her chest. Ezra busied himself with a kettle, soon pressing a mug of steaming tea into her hands. Prue blinked down at it, overwhelmed. No man had ever waited on her, not like this, not as if she deserved it. When she dared glance up, Ezra was watching her, his gaze steady, unashamed. "You're safe here," he said, and for the first time in her life, she almost believed it. The days in Ezra's cabin unfolded with a rhythm as natural as the forest itself. Morning light filtered through pine boughs and drifted across the rough-hewn floorboards, waking Prue to the sound of an axe striking wood or the low murmur of Ezra tending the animals. At first, she felt like a guest, tiptoeing around as though one wrong move might break the fragile peace. She folded blankets too carefully, scrubbed dishes until her knuckles ached, and whispered apologies each time she thought she was in his way. Ezra never let her wallow in that fear. If she burned the bread, he ate it without complaint. If she dropped a jar of herbs, he swept the glass with quiet efficiency. And when she apologized, he would only shake his head and say, "No harm done." Slowly, she began to breathe. One morning, he handed her a hatchet. "Come," he said, "I'll show you." Her eyes widened. "Me? Chop wood?" He nodded, lips twitching with the ghost of a smile. "If you can bake 20 pies in a day, you can split a log." Her first swing was clumsy, the hatchet glancing off the grain. She flushed, expecting ridicule. But Ezra stepped behind her, his hand covering hers on the handle, his voice steady in her ear. "Don't fight it. Follow the line. Let the wood tell you where to strike." Together they swung. The log split cleanly. A laugh, her laugh, burst from her chest, bright and unguarded. Ezra's smile, small but genuine, was worth more than all the compliments she had ever longed for in town. In the evenings, the cabin filled with the scent of her baking. She taught him to knead dough, his large hands awkward at first, flour dusting his beard. He listened with patient attention as she showed him how to pinch a crust or test the sweetness of an apple. He never laughed at her instructions, never diminished her knowledge. After supper, Ezra would read aloud from the few books he kept. Poetry, travel journals, medical texts from his years in the city. His voice was low, deliberate, lingering on the words as though tasting them. Prue, her hands busy with mending or embroidery, often found herself watching him instead of her needle. His brow furrowed slightly when he read something moving, his lips curved when the words pleased him. One night, when she hummed softly as she worked, Ezra paused. "Keep going," he said. She blinked. "It's nothing, just an old hymn." "Sing it," he urged. Her cheeks flamed, but she obeyed. Her voice, uncertain at first, grew steadier. The melody wrapped around the crackle of the fire, filling the cabin with something almost holy. When she finished, Ezra's eyes were fixed on her, gray and bright in the firelight. "You have a gift," he said simply. "You bring warmth where there was none." The words struck deeper than he could know. For years, she had been told she brought only embarrassment, only shame. Now, someone said she brought warmth. She pressed a hand to her lips, overwhelmed by tears. Ezra didn't press her to speak. He simply reached across the table, covering her trembling hand with his. His touch was steady, patient, as though he had all the time in the world to wait for her to believe in herself. As winter deepened, Prue began to see the cabin not as a hiding place, but as a home. She planted herbs in clay pots by the window, mended curtains with cheerful embroidery, and filled shelves with jars of preserves. Ezra built her a rocking chair, carved with roses and ivy, and placed it by the fire. One evening, as snow drifted past the shutters, she curled in that chair with a quilt across her lap. Ezra was at the workbench, carving a small wooden figure. She watched him, the set of his shoulders, the concentration in his eyes, and whispered to herself, "This is what it feels like to be wanted." Ezra looked up as though he had heard. His gaze met hers across the warm glow of the hearth. "You're perfect here," he said softly. Her heart stilled, then beat again, faster and stronger than ever. For the first time in her life, she didn't flinch at the word perfect, because in his eyes, she truly was. By late winter, Cedar Falls buzzed with rumors. Prudence McKinnon was no longer seen at her family's stall, no longer walking the streets with baskets of bread. Instead, whispers told of her vanishing into the forest with the reclusive Ezra Thornfield. Cordelia Ashworth fanned the flames herself. "The poor girl's been bewitched," she declared at every gathering. "Lured away by that wild man. It's disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful." The words dripped with feigned concern, but her eyes glittered with satisfaction. In truth, Cordelia's outrage masked envy. How could the very girl she had humiliated in public find happiness when her own son, Theodore, remained unmarried and useless? When her own influence, carefully built over years, was now questioned by those who dared whisper, "Maybe Prudence chose better than we thought." Theodore nursed his own grievance. He had once made crude advances toward Prue, only to be rebuffed. That rejection festered into humiliation, and now, seeing her content in another man's arms, he wanted revenge. It was Theodore who stumbled upon the truth. With the help of Jeremiah Black, a private detective eager for coin, he uncovered Ezra's inheritance, hundreds of acres of pine forest, rich with timber, worth a fortune. If they could destroy Ezra's reputation, the land might fall into their hands. Cordelia's plan was simple and cruel. They would paint Ezra as a criminal and Prue as his victim. If the sheriff believed Ezra guilty of abduction, the law would strip him of everything. So one frosty morning, as Prue tended herbs in the cabin windowsill, a knock thundered on the door. Ezra opened it to find Sheriff Alcott standing there, flanked by Theodore and Jeremiah Black. "Ezra Thornfield," the sheriff announced, reading stiffly from a paper. "You're accused of kidnapping Prudence McKinnon and holding her against her will. You'll come with us." Prue's heart dropped. "No!" she cried, rushing forward. "It isn't true. I came here by choice. He's never harmed me." Cordelia, lurking just beyond, stepped into view, her voice dripping venom. "Oh, my poor girl, you can't even see it, can you? He's bewitched you. You think this is love, but it's nothing more than his hold over you. You're not in your right mind." The sheriff wavered, glancing between them. Ezra's jaw tightened, but he offered no protest, only placed his rifle carefully against the wall and held out his hands for the irons. "If I go quietly, perhaps she will be spared further insult," he murmured. Prue's eyes filled with tears. "No, don't let them take you. Tell them the truth." Ezra's gaze softened. "The truth won't matter to those who don't wish to hear it." They dragged him away as Prue screamed his name. Theodore smirked, tipping his hat in mockery as he passed. Back in town, Cordelia wasted no time. She paraded Prue through the streets under the guise of protection, declaring that her family had rescued her from a brute. Prue's protests fell on deaf ears. Neighbors shook their heads, whispering, "Poor girl, she doesn't even know she's trapped." But something had shifted inside Prudence McKinnon. The woman who once ran from laughter at the harvest fair now stood straighter, her voice firmer. At every turn, she repeated the truth. "I am here because I love him. Ezra Thornfield is no criminal. He is my choice." Some sneered, but others listened. The blacksmith, her own father, began to question. He recalled the bruises Ezra had carried into town after helping mend a broken wagon, the care with which he had spoken to the children at the mill. Doubt crept into the cracks Cordelia had tried to seal. In the dim cell of Cedar Falls jail, Ezra sat alone, staring at the stone wall. He had endured loss before, but the thought of losing Prue cut deeper than any wound he'd carried from the city. And in her parents' home, watched day and night, Prue knelt at the window, whispering into the cold night air, "Hold on, Ezra. I'll find a way. I won't let them steal you from me." The trial was set for a gray morning in Cedar Falls. The courthouse filled with townsfolk, eager for spectacle, their whispers echoing through the rafters. Cordelia Ashworth sat in the front row, chin high, Theodore lounging smugly beside her. Ezra, shackled but unbowed, stood tall at the defendant's table, his gray eyes fixed forward. When Prudence entered, a hush fell. Gone was the timid girl who once fled from laughter. She wore a plain blue dress, her hair neatly pinned, her face calm, though her heart thundered. She walked straight to the witness stand, her hands steady as they rested on the rail. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Miss McKinnon, do you claim you were taken against your will?" Prue lifted her chin. "No. I went with Ezra Thornfield freely. He never forced me, never harmed me. I am with him because I choose him." A murmur swept the crowd. Cordelia's face tightened, but she rose with feigned sorrow. "The poor girl doesn't know what she's saying. Can't you see? She's bewitched, trapped in some fantasy." Prue turned, her voice sharp enough to cut through the murmurs. "Bewitched? No, Mrs. Ashworth. For the first time in my life, I am not bewitched by lies. You told the town I was too fat to be a wife. You made me believe I was worthless. But Ezra saw me, truly saw me, when no one else did. That is not a spell. That is love." The words struck like a bell. A silence followed, heavy, broken only by the shifting of uneasy feet. Some townsfolk lowered their eyes, ashamed, recalling their own cruel laughter at the harvest fair. Then came the blow that shattered Cordelia's facade. Jeremiah Black, the detective she had hired, stepped forward unexpectedly. Pressed under oath, he admitted he had been paid to twist evidence and spread rumors about Ezra's land. Gasps erupted. Theodore blanched, his arrogance crumbling. The judge rapped his gavel, eyes narrowing at Cordelia. It seems, Madam Ashworth, the lies were yours to bear. Ezra's shackles were struck free. He crossed the floor in long strides, and Prue rose to meet him. In front of the entire town, she took his hands, tears glistening in her eyes. "They tried to make me doubt," she whispered, her voice carrying in the silent hall. "But I know now, you are my home." Ezra cupped her face, his voice low, unshaken. "And you are my heart. You are perfect to be mine." The crowd, those who once jeered, stood hushed, many with tears in their eyes. For the first time, Prudence McKinnon was no longer the butt of their jokes. She was the woman who had faced them all and chosen love without shame. Cordelia and Theodore, their schemes exposed, were led from the hall in disgrace. But Prue and Ezra walked out hand in hand into the cold sunlight, free. The snow had begun to melt when Prue and Ezra returned to Pine Valley. The air was damp with the scent of pine needles and thawing earth, the forest waking from its long slumber. Their horse picked its way carefully along the trail, carrying them back to the cabin that had become their refuge. When the familiar shape of the house appeared between the trees, Prue's throat tightened. She had feared she might never see it again. The carved porch railings, the smoke curling from the chimney, the garden still sleeping under frost. To her, it was no longer Ezra's cabin. It was their home. Inside, the fire sprang to life, warming the room with its steady glow. Ezra hung his coat by the door and turned to her, his gaze soft but steady. "You've been braver than I ever was," he said. "You stood before them all. You claimed what was ours." Prue shook her head, tears prickling her eyes. "I was terrified." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing love in spite of it." Her breath caught. For years she had hidden, shrunk, apologized for existing, but now, standing in the golden light of the hearth with Ezra's hands around hers, she felt tall, steady, and whole. She leaned against him, her cheek pressed to his chest. His heartbeat thudded beneath her ear, strong and certain. The world beyond the valley might still whisper, still doubt, but here she was seen, cherished, chosen. "You're safe here," Ezra murmured into her hair. "If you'll have it, this is your home." Prue closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. But somewhere in her heart, the question lingered. Was their love strong enough to withstand the world outside Cedar Falls? Stories like Prudence and Ezra's remind us that love is strongest when it defies cruelty, when it grows in places no one believed it could. Every word of scorn she once carried was undone by a single truth: being seen, cherished, and chosen just as you are. I wonder, where are you listening from tonight? Do you believe love this true still exists in our world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every time you do, it reminds me that these stories are bridges, carrying hope from one heart to another. And the next one may be just for you.